Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to the third day of the Powering Past Coal Alliance Summit. I am Dara Traum, Head of Energy Transition at Bloomberg NEF and the anchor for this session. We had a busy few days, notably with the launch of the Global Coal Countdown database on Tuesday and sessions on transition finance and grid, all of which can be rewatched on the PPCA website. Before we move into today's agenda, just a quick note to remind you that you can submit questions and answers at the bottom of the Summit page that you're following this video on. Now, for opening remarks, I'm pleased to introduce our session hosts, Dan Jorgensen, Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities of Denmark, and Ansa Williams, Global Head of Climate and Environmental Programs at Bloomberg Philanthropies.
Thanks everyone for joining today. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this session on opportunities of the race to net zero as a part of Powering Past Coal Alliance Global Summit. Thank you very much to the PPCA and all members for actively taking lead on a global phase-out of coal. And thanks to Bloomberg Philanthropies and Bloomberg New Energy Finance for co-leading this session today with us. 2020 was in many ways a tough year. We all had to face the challenges of COVID-19, but despite of having to fight a global pandemic, 2020 was also a year marked by a series of ambitious climate announcements. From all over the world, we've heard statements on reaching net zero emissions in 2050, announcements from national governments, but also from major companies, and this is impressive. But statements alone do not fight climate change. We need to put actions behind our words. We need concrete policies to limit the use of fossil fuel and investments to boost renewables and energy efficiency. And we need to do things faster and on a much bigger scale. Now, let us turn to coal. Coal is a central driver of climate change, and the consumption is still expected to grow. The ironic thing is that solar and wind energy has now become cheaper than fossil-based power in most parts of the world. So actually, investing in coal for power production in 2021 is like when people invested in horses for transportation in 1921. It's just bad for business. We all know that industries, nations and regions face different challenges in the green transition. There is not a one-size-fits-all solution. This is why we have to exchange experiences and good solutions so that we can overcome barriers and reach our net zero emission targets in 2050 together. This session has exactly that purpose, exchanging insights across the public and private sectors and across regions. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I wish you a good and fruitful session. I will now give the floor to Ansa Williams from Bloomberg Philanthropies.
Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to join you for today's session, organized jointly with the Danish government as part of the Powering Past Coal Alliance Summit. My name is Ansa Williams, and I head up global climate and environmental programs at Bloomberg Philanthropies. The Powering Past Coal Alliance was launched by the United Kingdom and Canada in 2017, and since then has played a vital role in bringing together like-minded governments, businesses, financial institutions, and organizations to help drive ambitious climate action to phase out coal worldwide. Here at Bloomberg Philanthropies, we're strong supporters of the Powering Past Coal Alliance and have seen the incredible achievements from the Alliance over the past years. Thanks in part to their work, global efforts to address climate change are accelerating. Today, as we work to recover from the upheaval to our energy systems caused by the global pandemic, it's never been more clear. The race to net zero is on. More than 120 countries have now pledged to reach net zero emissions. This includes major world economies like the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and China. And more recently, the new Biden-Harris administration committed to decarbonize the United States power sector by 2035, marking a major shift both here in the US and around the world. But commitments are just the first step, and the global transition to net zero will require a significant transformation of our energy systems. This starts with the transition away from coal. Plain and simple, we can't reach our Paris goals and achieve net zero emissions while we still burn coal. It's time to raise our ambition level to set us on the right trajectory to net zero by 2050. That means supporting economies like the EU, where most countries have committed to phasing out coal to meet the increased target of a 55% emissions reduction by 2030. It also means acknowledging where we need to work the most to ensure that we ramp up efforts in places like Asia, which is home to 90% of coal power plants that are under the age of 20 years and represent decades of operational lifetime that we can't afford. Reaching net zero will also require ambitious but reachable science-based goals with clear benchmarks we can meet along the way. Closing coal plants and rapidly deploying renewable energy in their place is the quickest way to make a dent in the near term, and it should be a primary strategy, both when planning and enacting those goals. We must do all of this while also leaving no one behind, supporting and uplifting affected regions and ensuring a just, fair, and economically sound transition for all. But it's doable because we now know that transitioning away from coal and spurring sustainable economic growth go hand in hand. It wasn't so long ago that the idea of reducing emissions, the idea was that reducing emissions was at odds with economic growth. But now we know that idea can't be further from the truth. Continuing to invest in coal and other fossil fuels will lead to high emissions lock-in and stranded assets. Thankfully, the global conversation has really shifted as leaders around the world and across sectors see that the long-term target of net zero emissions can be met while growing our economies. And we're seeing firsthand how the rapid phase out of fossil fuels can be achieved while bringing opportunities and jobs. With our partners at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, we released new research and analysis on the incredible opportunities for faster decarbonization in Europe and in Asia. And a recent Bloomberg New Energy Finance report showed that in China, rapid electrification and investment in renewables can build the country's leadership in new technologies and be an important driver of economic growth, all while accelerating decarbonization. In Central and Eastern Europe, Bloomberg NEF found that countries like Poland, Czechia, Romania, and Bulgaria stand to benefit economically from EU funding that focuses on enacting the Green Deal and promoting sustainable recovery plans. We can, in those regions, move off of coal, provide cheap and clean electricity, and create jobs and economic development at the exact same time. At Bloomberg Philanthropies, we believe in a future free from coal, one that will avoid the worst impacts of climate change, protect our health, and strengthen economies. Mike Bloomberg, the founder of Bloomberg Philanthropies and Bloomberg LP, and the United Nations Secretary General Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions, believes that climate change is among the greatest challenges we face today, one that can only be solved with global collaboration on an unprecedented scale. And it's true, in the race to net zero, we're stronger together. As governments meet at COP26 in November, we'll need concrete plans to drastically reduce emissions, and we'll need stronger, more ambitious, nationally determined contributions aligned with the 1.5-degree goal. The Powering Past Coal Alliance has emerged as a leading force in driving the transition to a clean energy future. And now PPCA's leadership is more important than ever. We're at a critical moment in history, and rebuilding from the devastating impacts of the pandemic gives us an extraordinary opportunity to deliver a green recovery, to rebuild better together. Today's event brings us one step closer to that goal and the collaboration that we need. Thank you again for joining us.
The European Union has been at the forefront of climate action for many years. Just at the end of last year, they've committed to half emissions from 1990 level, more than half emissions from 1990 level by 2030 and achieve net zero by 2050. Today, we're honored to welcome European Commissioner Kadri Simpson, a keynote speaker today to tell us about the European perspective on the race to zero and the transition away from coal. Commissioner Simpson, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Dear Minister Jorgensen, dear Mrs. Williams, thank you for inviting me to this very relevant and timely event. Dear ladies and gentlemen, fighting climate change is the most important challenge of the 21st century. In the EU, we have made a clear commitment and plan to reduce our emissions by 2030 at least 55% compared to 1990 levels. We intend to make the EU the world's first climate neutral bloc by 2050. We are pleased to see that key partners like Japan or the Republic of Korea have taken similar bold commitments, with China following suit in 2060. However, this is only the beginning. Getting to net zero calls for a collective planet-wide movement. Energy transition has a crucial role in reaching this goal. The most prosperous nations in the world have a moral responsibility to act. We must show the way, and the EU is strongly committed to do so. The clean energy transition is also an opportunity. We must look at the transition not only as a challenge, but also as an immense opportunity. This is why the European Green Deal is more than an ambition for us, for our energy and climate policy. It is also a future-oriented growth strategy. Becoming climate neutral will be disruptive for our economies, but the unprecedented amount of investments it requires will also bring jobs, wealth, and health to our nations. It will make us more resilient and better prepared for the future. In order to reap these benefits, we need to fully gear our productive engines towards the climate neutrality objective. We need to invest massively in renewable energy, in smart grids, in hydrogen and storage technologies to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and ultimately phase them out altogether. We also need to invest in people. A new economy requires more than technology and infrastructure. It also requires a properly skilled workforce. We need to train and retrain our workers, especially those that today work in sectors that will be downsizing or disappearing altogether as a result of the energy transition. This brings me to the issue of just transition. We know that by decarbonizing our energy and industry, we will ultimately be better off, and not only when it comes to cleaner air and reduced emissions, but also when it comes to innovation, new economic opportunities for European companies, and new type of jobs for our people. Pros outweigh the cons, and by far. However, we have to recognize that some sectors and communities will be negatively impacted. This is particularly true for those areas and sectors that are currently relying on fossil fuels. Coal and other solid fossil fuels have no place in the energy mix of a climate neutral Europe. The coal industry is already shrinking in Europe. This is happening mainly due to our ambitious policies, which have sent the market clear price signals. That said, coal industry is still an important job provider in Europe, employing about 150,000 workers. Economic transition makes some sectors disappear. This has been a natural consequence of technological progress and economic cycles throughout the centuries. But people and communities remain, and it is our duty to support them through the transition. We have to use the lessons from our past experience with shifts in economy to help the most affected people and communities so that ultimately they also can benefit from the green transition. This is why the EU is strongly committed to ensuring a just transition. This objective lies at the very heart of the Green Deal and is supported by a comprehensive set of policies and sources of funding. Even before the Green Deal took shape, the Commission already launched an initiative for coal regions in transition. Today, it has been expanded to other fossil fuels such as lignite, oil shale, and peat. It has already helped dozens of EU regions to actively prepare for and adjust to the energy transition. For example, we have supported the Polish region of Silesia in adopting a strategy for the repurposing of former mining sites. We are now extending this support to Poland as a whole. We have helped Greece in envisioning a future beyond lignite for Western Macedonia, leading to the boldest coal phase-out commitment in the world, with a decision to close all lignite power plants by 2028. We have supported regions of Germany, Poland, and Czech in establishing a multilateral cooperation, working together and across borders on the common vision for transition and the future economic development of the area. The cooperation looks, for example, at alternative fuels and tourism. These policy efforts will now be supplemented by a just transition mechanism, which will mobilize up to 100 billion euros in most affected regions by 2030. Our support does not stop there. Of course, all EU funds, especially recovery funds, will be contribute to a clean and fair energy transition. Overall, we have the objective of spending a third of Europe's 1.8 trillion euro budget and recovery funds on supporting green transition. It is especially fitting to use the revenues of our emission trading system to help accelerate this transition through the new innovation and modernization funds. This is a virtuous circle. More expensive CO2 provides us more resources to decarbonize our energy. But even with all this EU financial firepower, public spending alone will not be enough. We need private companies to invest in clean energy, in energy efficiency, and in decarbonizing their processes. This makes sound business case. Companies that delay decisions to invest in the clean energy transitions will face increasing difficulties moving ahead. Early movers, on the other hand, will be the industry leaders of tomorrow. We do not need to look far to see a great example of that. It is no coincidence that today's event is co-hosted by Denmark and features Danish industry leaders. Let's use their experience as an inspiration to engage in the energy transition with ambition and enthusiasm. I am glad to see that discussions on the importance of just transition in phasing out the fossil fuel economy are not only taking place in Europe. Many of our partners are making this the center of their policies. More and more work streams on people-centered energy transition are taking place before the COP26. Earlier this year, Europe's foreign ministers called for phasing out coal in energy production and ending all financing of new coal infrastructure in third countries. To help with this, in Europe's neighborhood, the Commission has just launched a new initiative with several international partners to help coal regions in the Western Balkans and Ukraine transition towards a carbon-neutral economy. Our work will benefit 17 coal regions. We will be helping to exchange best practices, transfer of knowledge, and capacity building. The initiative will also provide financial support for transition activities to our neighbors. I believe that phasing out coal and transitioning to a green energy system will be much easier if we share our experiences and lessons learned. And it's crucial that countries with rich economies continue to provide their know-how and aid to the developing countries. This event and today's panel in particular are an important step in that direction. I wish you all an interesting discussions and bright ideas. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Simpson. Been delighted to hear about some of the partnerships you're doing in the EU, especially in terms of cross-border collaboration and the Just Transition funding. We're going to move to the next part of the program, which is going to have a panel. But before that, I just wanted to share a few insights with you. First, in terms of the importance from the European perspective of electrification in reaching the new climate targets that Commissioner Simpson talked to us about, net zero by 2050, but more importantly, a minus 55% reduction by 2030. Essentially, the approach that seems to be the one standing out and where there's consensus is electrification first and foremost. And so one thing we can see here is between an economic transition scenario where essentially our climate goals are not met, but this is just the economic evolution of the energy sector. Power demand is expected to remain almost flat with just the electrification of transport EVs here, because of course in the European context, economic growth doesn't justify a massive ramp up. But if you want to align with net zero targets, what we see is actually almost a doubling of electricity demand, 1.8% on the right. And that's because you start to electrify things like heat, industry, and of course transport. And you need to do that earlier. So even by 2030, there is already a high degree of electrification. For this to work, of course, the electricity needs to be supplied by clean power sources, and that's where the challenge is from perspective of coal phase-outs. The other point I wanted to make is, why is this electrification and clean power narrative really salient when you consider meeting climate targets? Is that essentially electricity is, in general, a much more efficient way to consume power. So what you see here on this slide is 3 applications: vehicle, steel production, and building heating. And always the electricity-based process has a more efficient conversion efficiency. And so EVs are more efficient than their petrol and internal combustion engine alternatives. Recycling steel and using electric arc furnaces is obviously much more efficient than steel. And similarly in building heatings, heat pumps are a really efficient way to heat your home. But it's also in the power sector at large that actually electricity made from renewables is much more efficient in terms of conversion than the losses you have in the process of burning coal and CCGT. And in fact, coal is by far the most inefficient energy carrier, although of course it has other attributes that made it so useful for many years. But again, it's energy system that rely more on renewables will be one that is more efficient and with less losses. And that's why electrification is just such a powerful pathway to meet our climate targets. So when we run the numbers and we try to look at, what's the role of coal phase outs in meeting our climate targets, here is just 3 pictures. One is the one of economic transition, and that serves as a reminder that actually policy action is really necessary for coal phase out. So in the current European context, carbon prices help coal capacity decline very fast to 2030 is what you see, the sort of the steep decline. But actually, especially in Germany and in Central Eastern Europe, you have some coal that will stay online until 2050 on economic grounds because it's needed by the system if we do not take policy action. In the middle, you see the current state of policy. And so there, Germany has a 2038 coal phase out, but actually the rest of European coal capacity is not yet covered by such agreements. And the last one is the scenario where we essentially tried our best to optimize for a curve towards 2050. Some will say coal needs to get out even faster, but essentially a full coal phase out is needed before 2040 to get to net zero across the European Union. This picture will, of course, vary from country to country and region to region, and that's the point of today's panel, is actually to exchange and talk about the narratives across different markets and with some of these experts. So I'm delighted to welcome my colleague Felicia Aminov, who is part of the energy transitions team at Bloomberg NEF, and who will introduce and moderate the panel. Thank you, Felicia.
Thank you, Dario. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're watching this. I'm an energy transitions analyst at Bloomberg NEF, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's panel speakers. So with us today, we have Governor Yang of Chungnam Province in South Korea. We have Carola van Rijnsove, Ambassador for Sustainability at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. We have Henrik Godenker, Director at the Japanese utility JERA, and Ulrik Stridbeck, who's Head of Regulatory Affairs at the Danish utility Ørsted. So a warm welcome to all our speakers. We will start today's discussion with the following themes. So we'll discuss the effect of net zero targets, as all panelists here come from regions with such a target. We'll discuss how to overcome challenges and the role of partnerships. Any potential questions submitted by the audience will be addressed at the end of this discussion, if time allows. So I'd like to address my first question to Governor Yang. The Chungnam province has committed to coal phase out by 2050 and joined the PPCA already in 2018, which is over 2 years before the national South Korean net zero target was announced. What pushed the Chungnam province to become a pioneer in South Korea? And how can national and subnational net zero targets support each other?
It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. With regards to achieving net zero in 2050, this global initiative is trying to transition to full clear energy by moving away from fossil fuels, including coal. I would like to really commend PPCA for enabling today's forum that enables diverse policy sharing and cooperation. Yes, Chungnam Province has been led by the national government's clear goal setting, and I believe cooperation between the national and local government is key, as was seen in the response to the pandemic. And it was in October 2020 that the ROK government declared a net zero vision by 2050. Moving away from adaptive reduction to proactive response. And the Chungnam province has actually declared net zero goal in October 2019. And we are aiming an energy transition without leaving anyone behind in the local economy. This is 1 year ahead of the national government. And we have the 2050 neutral carbon net zero basic plan, and we will we'll do our utmost to participate in the 2050 net zero national policy so that we can bring about a net zero society in Korea as a whole. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Governor. Very encouraging to hear the ambition of the Chungnam region. So I'd like to address my next question to Hendrik. Japan's net zero target was announced in October last year, and around the same time, JERA announced its own net zero target. How has the Japanese national net zero by 2050 target affected JERA and the momentum for accelerated coal phase-outs?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to join this gathering today. Terrific that we can be tying together different regions as well. Directly to your question, actually, JERA's announcement of a net zero goal slightly preceded the government's announcement. We, as a leading Japanese energy company, felt it was really important to take the initiative to find a pathway to a sustainable future. The announcement that we made was broadly welcomed by the government and by our industry colleagues. It sets a path forward in Japan. The government had already earlier in 2020 made a significant initiative in seeking to implement the phase out of older, less efficient coal-fired power plants. And the announcement of 2050 net zero goal has really put some wind behind the sails. That endeavor really has to come first and has to be accelerated to achieve the 2050 target. But the target is going to be much more ambitious than just phasing out older coal-fired power plants. It's an effort that requires decarbonizing electricity, which is where we are, but also mobility and society as a whole. For us, from our perspective, that's going to require certainly aggressive development of renewable power sources. That's something that we're working on with our partner, who's here as well as new technology for energy storage and then decarbonizing power. Ultimately, I would say it's not just an issue that can be driven by the private sector alone. It's not just government alone. We're going to hand in hand, and particularly place an emphasis on scaling up some new technologies and also placing an appropriate value on clean energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Hendrik. Yes, very, very encouraging to hear so many positive commitments. So, Carola, my next question goes to you. The Netherlands has announced the national targets to phase out all coal plants by 2030. What has been the role of the EU's climate target, and specifically net zero target, in enabling the Netherlands to set this coal phase-out agenda? And what are the main challenges with achieving this great shift over the next 10 years?
Well, thank you, Felicia, and thank you also for bringing us together with such a diverse group from different regions to discuss this. Before answering your question, I really want to go back also to the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, because it's so clearly set out that coal-fired power plants are no longer an option. It made clear that we had to peak by 2020 and reduce by 80% by 2030, and then really phase it out by 2040. And to achieve that worldwide, I think Europe has to phase out a bit earlier even to make sure that we reach that worldwide goal. This was a bit of a problem for the Netherlands because we have 3 coal-fired power plants that are really relatively new. They all became operational around 2015. So taking them out of operation while being among the world's most efficient and modern plants was really quite difficult. But we still felt the only way to reach the goals and to contribute to them was to actually close them. So we decided to do that by 2030. And from 2030 onwards, it will be prohibited in the Netherlands to produce electricity from coal. And we think that that's very important. And also these new plants, we will close them or convert them, but not use them for coal-fired power generation anymore. And we hope, of course, that this decision will give a strong signal to others as well, to not upgrade existing plants or not invest in new coal-fired power plants, because they simply become stranded assets over time. It's not a good investment. And you asked for the role that the EU decision-making has played. Well, we were among the countries in the EU that were pleading for an ambitious EU greenhouse gas reduction target because we feel it is in the interest of our country and in the interest of the world as a whole to ambitiously reduce emissions just to prevent global warming. So we were very happy that, as the Commissioner also mentioned, that we were able to agree last year this 55% emissions reduction target for 2030 and climate neutrality by 2050, underpinned actually by an EU climate law that's currently in the making. Key to reaching this arrangement or agreement, and in particular the 2030 target, was to put an emphasis on and to support the just and fair transition. So that is an incredible element in reaching this agreement and being able to agree to make sure that we leave no one behind and that we make sure that this transition is fair for everyone. Together, we must make sure also that the funds available for the transition are spent well in a way to transition away from coal towards renewables. And that, I think, is still a challenge, but together we can master that. I wanted to finally note that in January, the EU foreign ministers, they jointly called for worldwide phasing out of coal in energy production. And as a first step, they called for an immediate end to all financing of new coal infrastructure in third countries. So that is also an important view from the European Union. And I think we are ready to support that transition away from coal in different ways. And we can talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's indeed one of the big challenges of this energy transition is to ensure a just transition and as well to make sure that the available funding is directed in the right way. Next, we'll be discussing a bit more about the challenges of phasing out coal, and I want to address a question to someone who's already gone very far on this. So Ørsted has set a target of becoming carbon neutral already by 2025 and has moved from being a player active in coal to mainly focusing on offshore wind. So Ørsted's target is much earlier and more ambitious than the EU's net zero by 2050 target. What has been the main factors that has enabled Ørsted to have a more ambitious target than the countries where you operate? And how have you overcome these challenges? Ulrik, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for inviting me to this extremely important discussion. From our side, there is a pull and a push here, and I think the most important is, as we heard Minister Dan Jørgensen also speak to, that he has made it a bad business for us to operate coal-fired power stations. The global political, the national political setting a direction away from greenhouse gas emissions is, of course, the most important at play here. And then there is a push also from us, where we have seen that we, from the industry, apart from phasing out and closing down, can also take action in our own hand by developing the alternative. For our sake in Ørsted, it became offshore wind power that we saw an opportunity in. We, together with the full supply chain, decided that this is an option, but we really, really need to bring down costs. And we did that with a very, very decisive industrial action over 5-10 years, but preceding that, another 10 years of development. So those were the key elements. On the more detailed, what drove us and what led us to this target by already 2025 was very much leading back actually to what we also heard very encouraging from Governor Yang from the Chunning province in South Korea, was that on a more regional and local level, that is where your customers are. And for our coal-fired power stations, they are also producing district heating, and our district heating customers, municipals, regional, they wanted us to phase out of coal. They wanted carbon neutral alternatives. So this has also been very decisive for us in developing these pathways, these targets, working together with our customers, our heat customers, our electricity customers, and finding alternatives. And in that way, not only seeing that the coal was bad business, but also finding solutions that has turned out to be both a sensible business for us, but certainly also the solutions that our customers wanted. So it's a combination of all these factors.
Thank you very much, Ulrik. So yeah, Ørsted was pushed by the Danish government, which made coal into bad business, and you also had the option of developing offshore wind. Then we'll move on to discussing Japan, who has a bit of a challenge because of a lack of available land, both for wind and solar, and not as much shallow seabed as Denmark. But advancements in new generation technologies are promising. For example, floating offshore wind and using ammonia as a fuel. So Hendrik, I would like to ask you, what would need to happen for it to be possible for Japan to phase out all coal? And additionally, do you think this can be done without investing in new natural gas plants, which might become stranded assets as we aim for net zero emissions? Hendrik, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you're absolutely correct that that Japan has limited resources to dispose of limited resources to access renewable power. JERA is very active in this area. We are developing offshore wind, fixed bottom offshore wind in various places in Asia and in Japan, in some of the few places where that can be done. And we're quite active in developing floating offshore wind, which has some real promise for Japan. But still, the resources are going to be too limited to rely just on renewables to phase out coal. So we need a different roadmap in Japan, and we probably need a different roadmap in much of Asia. For us, well, renewables will certainly be a part of the answer, but we are also moving very rapidly to find ways of using green fuels in thermal power, basically to maintain the stability of the Japanese grid. We think some element of thermal power will have to remain. The first initiative that we're taking is to coal-fire ammonia in coal-fired power plants. Initially, this will be roughly 20% of capacity, but we can ramp that up, we think, and perhaps even fire only ammonia in existing power plants. You asked about natural gas. Yes, we do generate a lot of electricity using natural gas, but a number of our facilities also can use hydrogen just as it is, and biofuel is also an alternative. So we are working on ways to bring those green fuels into Japan. Big challenges there. There's no infrastructure for all of this green fuel, and how do you do it economically? We don't have all the answers on that, but at least we are starting and have gotten underway our first ammonia project right now. So I do think that this offers an important door opener, not just for the power sector. We do need to decarbonize power, but if we are also able to introduce ammonia and hydrogen to be used more broadly, those energy carriers can be very important tools in decarbonizing the industrial sector, mobility, and heating and other uses. So I think it's really important for us to look at this as a broad, not only a global discussion, but also a cross-sectoral discussion to see if we can find an optimal way to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's a good point that advancing the ammonia and hydrogen technologies in the power sector could indeed have benefits for other sectors as well, which are still not decarbonized in Europe or really elsewhere at all. Next, I would like to address a question to Governor Young. So what are the major challenges faced by the Chungnam province for achieving your coal closure targets? And what solutions are you planning to rely on to address these challenges?
예, 2018년 제가 7월에
Yes, so when I took office in July 2018, I started working on my first pledge. My first pledge was a clean air, clear Chungcheong province. And I really worked on creating a consensus on earlier closures of coal power plants. A committee was created by the civic communities, and we had 3 tasks. One was to, when we close aged coal plants, we need to think about how to transition the people, how to retrain the people, and how to overcome the economic difficulty, and how to come up with the green or environmentally friendly plants to replace coal plants. And in order to overcome these challenges, we worked on really a justified transition that would create jobs and that would overcome the economic recession. We have plans to attract public institutions and also renewable development plans to create new jobs and to train former plant workers. And because the local economy is undergoing difficulties due to plant closures, we asked the government to designate this area as an industrial crisis response area. And we also created the Justice Energy Transition Fund. And so we came up with a diverse portfolio of solutions. And up until 2040, we have plans to create a 5 gigawatt tidal energy using and also using hydrogen to come up with so that we can replace the power that came from the coal power plants. To transition to renewable energies, we created what is called the powering away from coal reserve, and we had the declaration for this last fall, and we attracted in December at the declaration ceremony 56 institutes who pledged $132.9 billion to renewable energy. And we have related this with the P4G Summit that will be held this May, so that we have the second zero coal reserve declaration to expand the pledged amount. The public banks and private banks have invested trillions in coal power plants at home and abroad. And we believe that our efforts will actually turn the tide of the institutions and accelerate transition from coal to renewable energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Governor. Yes, the theme of just transition has come up both in Commissioner Simpson's keynote speech and also is a solution to the coal phase out in the Chungnam province. Next, we will move on to discussing the role of partnerships in reaching these targets. And for Carola is the next question. As an ambassador for sustainable development, you have worked on partnerships for inclusive green growth. And we've seen that a lot of the new coal pipeline is located in emerging economies with rapidly growing population. So what role can OECD countries, such as the Netherlands, play in offering a solid alternative to coal?
Yeah, thank you, Felicia. And I was very happy also to hear the governor mention the P4G Summit in May, and we're really looking forward to contributing to its success. But on your question, to achieve a rapid transformation, we need to improve the quality of the international cooperation and make it easier for countries to access a coherent and compelling package of support from the international community, including, of course, also access to finance for renewables. And in countries where coal remains a major source of employment, as was mentioned several times, we also need international assistance to reskill workers and to develop new high-quality jobs to enable a just transition to a sustainable low-carbon economy and to really exploit the opportunities, actually, that the transition offers. And adding to this, actually, the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic recession that has come with it make it all the more important for the international cooperation to flourish. We really need to invest now in the greener future with all these recovery packages that are being deployed in the face of the pandemic. We need to make sure that we point those in the right direction and not miss this opportunity, because such packages will not come again. And you know, the future closures of coal plants and the changes in associated jobs. It's big in Europe, it's big in my country, as I explained, but I think it's the biggest in Asia. The world's top 3 coal producers are China, India, Indonesia. And there the changes will be the biggest, also in South and Southeast Asia. The economies are still very dependent on coal-fired power generation and actually on coal-based economic growth. And we have to really make a transformative change there. At the same time, countries in South and Southeast Asia face the biggest adaptation challenges, the biggest risks from climate change. So where they have the most to, as it seems, to lose from moving away from coal, they also have the most to gain from this transition. So there is really an opportunity, and as an international community, we should be there to assist. As the Netherlands, we also think that access to affordable and reliable and modern energy is also essential to achieve SDG 7, to achieve energy access for all by 2030. And we have in our development cooperation the objective to provide 50 million people with access to renewable energy by 2030 with our development funding. And we developed a lot of programs and activities and partnership and cooperations to make that happen. And we're on a good track to achieve that goal of helping 50 million people in developing countries. Also, my boss, Minister Kaag, has become the champion for the energy access dialogue that is part of the UN high-level dialogue on energy that will take place in September, and that is actually being prepared now. So also there we contribute. The UK in the run-up to the COP26 climate summit in November has launched an energy transition dialogue, and also there we are very active. So we really hope we can bring together the global political, financial, and technical leadership, all these different stakeholders together to make the transition happen in time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to address my next question to Hendrik, and again on the theme of how we can help countries, especially in Southeast Asia, as Carola mentioned, and navigate this energy transition. So we discussed the challenges of Japan and limited renewable energy resources. But what role could Japan play in incubating and eventually exporting innovative solutions for other countries that may have similar challenges?
Yeah, it's a good question, and also I should say we very much support the initiatives that Carola has talked about. That there will be obviously a role for the private sector to play in bringing about a clean and just energy transition in Asia, and public funding can be a really important part of that. Well, I mentioned a few of JERA's initiatives. In developing, for example, offshore wind and floating offshore wind for Japan and other countries in Northern Asia, this also requires developing a supply chain and know-how and a core of workers who know the industry. We hope that we can transition some of the initial headway that's being made in Northern Asia to a broader area in that sector. We're also working on a variety of other new energy solutions that we think have real applicability in all around Asia. For example, battery storage solutions and creating energy security solutions or off-grid energy systems. We're working on this already in Japan, but especially in the island nations all around Asia, there's real work, there are real opportunities for this kind of solution. I'd also underline our work on ammonia and hydrogen. Getting those supply chains going provides opportunities on the supply side for some jurisdictions in Asia, but also this can provide really important ways for a lot of Asian countries to start decarbonizing their electricity systems. One of the concerns that we have is that there are limited capital resources and other resources in many places in Asia to build out the electric sector. And if we can use some of that existing asset base to bring about clean energy, that may be a good path forward. So introducing, say, ammonia and hydrogen into existing thermal facilities may be a very good way to begin to bring down the carbon footprint in lots of Asian countries. Renewables also face difficulties in that the grids are not very far along. So if we can use the existing asset base, we'll be that much further ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sounds like good thoughts on this topic. I'd like to address one more question to Ulrich from Ørsted on the role of partnerships between companies. So Ørsted has partnered with Agera to develop offshore wind. So Ulrich, how do you see the role of partnerships between companies accelerating coal phase-outs?
Thank you very much. May I take this opportunity to first talk about partnerships in the context of just transition very, very briefly, just to address that. The conversations, the points made by the ambassador and Governor Yang was very inspiring. I think contributing to a just transition is, of course, absolutely key. And a few observations from my side is that today we are employing more people than we did before. And today the investments that we make are generating a lot more jobs than we did generate before in the supply chain, delivering the offshore wind farms and associated activities. And today also the operational centers, for example, that we established to operate the offshore wind farms, they are typically in areas that have seen some hardship in maybe fisheries declining, maybe other activities declining, and seeing and welcoming these job opportunities very, very much. We've seen that in several places. So extremely important partnerships also locally here. And the final point on this is that the people that works in coal-related sectors, they also have children. And their children, they are extremely, we perceive extremely driven by values, by seeing a future that is very long term, and we are, and I think companies like us are attracting a lot of very bright young people that wants to work on things that are related to green transformation. So very promising also that. So let's continue partnering between private and public and government on these things. On the partnerships between companies, I think the example of Ørsted and Yara is a very, very good one. And for us as Ørsted, in our business model, partnership is the building block. We cannot do what it is that we would like to do without partnerships. It's absolutely key. There are things that Yara can do that we cannot do, and we believe there are things that we can do that Yara cannot do, and that's the whole concept of a partnership. And our success and our ability to advance has been built on partnerships all along. I think this is going to intensify even further. An endeavor like building offshore wind, that will require some level of specialization, and we bring something to the table and others bring other things to the table. When we are moving into some of the topics that also Henrik addressed around the green fuels, fuels for heavy transportation, making hydrogen for steel making, ammonia, and these kinds of things. We are complicating and adding layers even further to the equation, and the importance of partnerships will absolutely increase from that. And that is also our approach now, moving into the hydrogen and green fuels business. So absolutely yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrich. So our session is soon coming to an end. Unfortunately, we won't have time to address audience questions now. I'd like to give a final opportunity for a short remark from the governor of Cheongnam. I'd like to hear, what role do you see alliances as the PPCA playing in accelerating and enabling coal phase-outs?
예, PPCA 같은 단체
Yes, PPCA's activities actually help us in creating the rationale in our direction, in really minimizing the objections from the local residents. It was in 2017 that we have held international conferences on phasing away from coal, and we have joined the PPCA as a first member of Asia. And we also joined the Under 2 in 2019. And we have also been greatly benefited by the activities of PPCA. And thanks to the efforts and international coordination, we were able to phase out the coal power plants and also shorten the lifespan of existing power plants. And of course, the COFA, the zero coal COFA was also possible thanks to your cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Yang. So we have reached the end of this session. I sincerely hope that this discussion will carry on leading up until COP26, happening later this year in Glasgow. Much momentum has been built around these long-term targets, and let's hope that there will be progress on the policy gap when it comes to action in this decade. At the end, I'd like to thank the PPCA, as well as our session co-hosts, the Danish Energy and Climate Ministry and Bloomberg Philanthropies. And a big thank you to all our speakers for joining us here today.